Great time to be alive. Great time for music. It was summer vacation. I just finished ninth grade. I was 15 years old, and June 8th, 1979. This came out, and I ran down to the record store to pick it up. Picked it up at the record store in Seminary South. Had one of the cutest girls I've ever seen in my life used to work there. I can still remember what she looks like all these years later. But anyway, hey everyone on the VC. I'm continuing my series of Paul McCartney album reviews in order of release, and so we get to Back to the Egg. Like I said, this came out in June 1979, and so didn't do as well as his previous albums up to that point. Only got to number 6 in the UK and only number 8 in the US, which is a crying shame. And generally didn't get very good reviews either, which is kind of stupid. Cream Magazine gave it a pretty good review, but pretty much everyone else was not too kind to it, which just seems silly in then and now in retrospect. I think maybe with the whole punk rock new wave thing going on, all the music critics at that time sort of went out of their way to tear down the old guard, the old dinosaurs, so to speak. And I think this is one of the best albums of 1979. And maybe not the best album, but up there with them. And I think it's one of Paul's best solo albums ever. I would rank this as my second favorite of his solo albums, as a matter of fact. So, a lot of things going on around this time. They recorded this at 4 locations, I think. They recorded some of it in Scotland, some of it at Abbey Road in London, some of it at a studio that Paul made, I guess his personal studio in London, some of it at a castle in Kent in England. This was his first album in the United States anyway. He was on Columbia Records. He was still on Parlophone in the rest of the world. Got a big fat paycheck for signing with Columbia, and he was with them till mid-80s or so when he went back to Capitol, I believe. And also this kicked off a tour, the 1979 tour in 1980. Didn't get to America, unfortunately, because stop in Japan, Paul got caught and put in jail for having a suitcase full of weed, and so that just tells you not to let Linda pack your suitcase, I guess. But I don't know. I've never heard too much. I've heard a couple of clips of the 1979 tour. It'd be interesting to have that released because they played a lot of songs from this album, and I don't think he's ever really revisited it since. I don't think he's that big of a fan of this album because of its relative commercial failure. It sold more than 1 million copies and did well by anyone else's standards, but by Paul McCartney's standards, it didn't do that well, which is a shame. But I did my part and I bought my copy. And I remember going to the record store, seeing this. I thought the cover was really cool when I was 15 years old. Still think it's pretty cool when I'm an old guy. But brought the record home and loved it. Loved it from the get-go. Love it to this day. It's kind of thought of as a return to rock and roll and influenced by punk and new wave, which it is in a lot of ways. But it's also got quite a few ballads on here, and most of them are pretty good. So just get into the album. We'll start with side 1, or Sunny Side Up as it's called. First song is Reception, which is kind of just somebody fiddling with a radio knob going from station to station, but it's also got a great bass line, kind of just weird stuff, sort of like reminds me of the end of I Am the Walrus, stuff that the Beatles did. But I think it's a great introduction to the album, even though it may not be, it's music, so I guess you could call it a song proper, but it's just a weird little introduction bit. I love it though. Always did like that opening for this album. I'm going to give it a 10. Goes into Getting Closer, the only song on the album that was a relative hit, even though it only made it to number 20 in the States. It's My Salamander aside, stupid lyric. The song rocks pretty well. It's maybe a little bit too polished for punk rock. That's sort of what he was going for, I think. but it's not too far off from that. It's a great song. I love it. I give it a 10. We move on to song number 3 on side 1, which is "We're Open Tonight." It's a slow song, kind of a ballad, acoustic guitar. Paul's in great voice. I complained on Venus and Mars that the third song was a ballad, even though it's a great song. I said that it probably would have worked better being placed somewhere else on the album after the rocking open of Rock Show on that album, and I still stand by that, even though I thought it was a great song. Here, I think the slow ballad after getting closer works really well for some reason. Different song, I guess, but for whatever reason, it works really well. I really love it, and I'm going to give that a 10 as well. Then we are back to rock, kind of a punk rock influence song, "Spin It On." It's dumb lyrics, but it's propulsive, just driving rock and roll song. Paul again in great voice. I don't know what the weird sounds at the end of the song are. Sounds like doves or chipmunks or something, but whatever. It's another song I love. I give it a 10 as well. Side 1's looking pretty good so far. So now we get to "Again and Again and Again." This is a song written and sung by Danny Lane. This is something that Paul had started back on Venus and Mars, I think, where he would have some of the members of Wings let them write a song and sing a song, and or sing a song. A couple of them were songs he wrote that he let them sing. But was never a huge fan of that, because generally I buy a Paul McCartney album to hear Paul McCartney, not to hear the other people in the bands, in the Beatles after all. And but occasionally it works all right, and this is an instance where it works really good. This is probably, well, not probably, this is Danny Lane's best song with Wings, in my opinion. I love it. Sounds a lot like a Richard Thompson fan. Anyone that knows Fairport Convention and Richard Thompson, just sort of the guitar sound and the singing and just the musical intonations throughout it. I really love this song. I give it a 10. Then we move to possibly my favorite song on the album, "Old Siam Sir." The guitar bass introduction is great with Paul McCartney, Paul McCartney shouting lyrics. Just love the song, the back and forth of the bass at the beginning there, the riff there, and I love the song. I'm giving that a 10. It's one of my favorite of his songs. I really wish he would play stuff off of this album in concert nowadays, and instead of some of the songs that he plays all the time, put to rest for a while and go to this. Then we sort of change gears and go back into ballad mode to get a sort of soul R&B ballad. It's called "Arrow Through Me," and it's love the echoey, claustrophobic opening part of the song. Love Paul's vocals. Love the horns throughout the song. That's really cool. It's a 10 also. I think everything on side 1's gotten a 10 from me so far, so that's really shaping up well, and that's the end of side 1, so that's a 10 across the board. Um, I don't know why this didn't do better, because other than people thinking, Paul's just some old goat at this point, trying to latch on to the new sounds of the late 70s with the punk and new wave, and maybe they just kind of wrote him off as just somebody that has been trying to be hip and with it or something, maybe. But to my ears, this album is just as power pop great as things by the Knack and the Squeeze and things that were going on around the time. It's as far as punk, it's not the Sex Pistols, it's not the Clash, but at least he made a game attempt to try some of that stuff, and that's good on him, I think, for doing that. Cheap Trick, power pop wise, might be a little more beefed up guitars than you find on here, but there's plenty of good guitars. There's plenty of good singing and shouting and just upbeat rock and roll throughout. So just really don't know why this didn't do better. This is different years and different eras, but this is a way better album than say Wings at the Speed of Sound. It's even a better album than Venus and Mars, which I love. But anyway, so we go to side two, which is called Over Easy. We open with the Rockestra theme, if I can get that out. This is where Paul got just a ton of musicians together to play on this thing. There's Pete Townsend, David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, John Paul Jones and John Bonham from Led Zeppelin, and I don't know, a bunch of other people. Let me look, see if I'm missing anyone. Sadly, Kenny Jones plays drums on here. Paul had wanted to invite Keith Moon to join in on the fun, but Keith rudely dropped dead before they got around to recording it, unfortunately. That said, it's one of those super group type things from back in the '60s and early '70s that those things pretty much almost always sounded better on paper than they turned out to work out in reality. And it's same here. It's too many cooks in the kitchen type thing. It's a all right song, but it's pretty slight song in the end result. And so I give that one, give it a 6. It's an enjoyable instrumental with Paul shouting in the background every once in a while, but it's not really that great of anything in the end. I give it a 6. But the album bounces right back to form with To You is a just a great vocal. Love the guitar instrumental. Love the guitar introduction. Love Paul's vocals. Uh, Parts of the song sort of remind me of the Cars here and there. Love it. I give it a 10. And so we go to the next two, or the sort of combination songs. I call them. The first one is After the Ball and Million Miles. Uh, this one sounds sort of like the older version of Wings from say Venus and Mars, Band on the Run period, sort of the mid '70s Wings sounding music to me. Uh, it doesn't add up to a whole lot, but it's still pretty good, and it's good enough that I enjoy it. I'm going to give that one an 8. Then we go to the next combination song. Song number 4 is Winter Rose / Love Awake. Almost classical sounding here. It's pretty, but it goes on a little bit too long. It's got some nice bits throughout the song here and there, or the two songs put together here and there, but the center really doesn't hold together, and it sort of falls apart, and in the end just doesn't really amount to a whole lot. Uh, Pretty at times, but probably the weakest song, or songs, I guess, since it's two songs put together on the album. I give it a 5.5. Then we go to the broadcast, which is another little weird bit like Reception. It's a sort of a moody piano backing playing in the background, and then just some spoken word poetry or whatever's going on there. It's a bit strange. I do like it as a bridge piece. It's enjoyable enough, and it's a pretty short song. I think it's like a minute 30 seconds, where Reception's about a minute and 5 seconds. I give it a 6. It's fun. So we go to number 6 song on side 2, which is So Glad to See You Here. Love the carry on harmony bits where the 2 or 3 of them are chiming in. Love the Screaming McCartney vocals. Love the We're Open Tonight refrains, and comes back into the song towards the end. This is the song, and this whole album sounds like 1979 to me. And to me, certain years have their own sound, which is never really repeated again. 1967, for example, is one of those years. 1979 was definitely one of those years, and 1979 was one of the best years for music ever. 1965, 1966, and 7 accepted maybe, but 1979 was definitely a special year for music, and there was a lot of songs and albums released that year that just had a certain sound that wasn't around before and really wasn't around after that much. The early 80s were great, just as great, really, but they had a different sound. And 1979 to me, maybe it's because I was, like I said, 14 and 15 throughout that year, or 15 and 16 actually, but not that you care, but maybe I was young and it was just that time. But it always had a unique, special sound. Not just this album, but a lot of the great albums that came out that year. And so, anyway, what do we do for So Glad to See You Here? We give it a 10. And then we close with a kind of a slow, nice ballad, a slow dance into the night lullaby type ballad called Baby's Request. Just a For all the upbeat rock and roll, you might expect a rock, just a sort of a knees up rock and roll ending. Instead, you get a ballad, but it works here. Really good song. Love the muted trumpet at the end of, towards the very end of the song, and it's a little out of character with a lot of what's on the album, but there are other ballads on there, so maybe not. But I give Baby's Request a 9.5. Love this album. Like I said, after Ram, this would be my favorite McCartney album, and it gets a 10. And so I will be back sometime soon, not tonight because I'm tired, with the next album, which is McCartney 2.